Evelyn awoke to a stark white ceiling, the pungent smell of antiseptic invading her nostrils. As she blinked her eyes into focus, she saw a line trailing from her arm and disappearing behind the railing of the hospital bed. The room swam around her, the pale green walls, the muted TV flickering in the corner, the steady beep of the heart monitor. Where was she? Why was she here? The questions flooded Evelyn's spinning mind as she tried to push through the fog settling over her thoughts. Her head throbbed with a dull pain, and she winced as she gingerly touched the bandage wrapped around it. Had she hit her head? As Evelyn struggled to sit up, a nurse bustled into the room. "Oh good, you're awake," she said kindly. "How are you feeling?" Evelyn stared at her in confusion. I'm not sure. What happened to me?" The nurse frowned. "You were in an accident. A taxi hit you while you were crossing the street. Don't you remember?" Evelyn shook her head slowly, panic rising inside her. She searched her mind but found nothing. No memories of who she was, where she came from. Only an expanse of empty space where her past should be. "What's my name?" she whispered. "Do you know who I am?" Over the next few days, Evelyn discovered the sparse hints about the stranger she now was. The hospital staff addressed her as Evelyn, guessing from the initials EM engraved on a delicate silver locket found around her neck. They told her she was a talented pianist with a spacious apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. But no friends or family came to claim her as she recovered, leaving Evelyn to wonder if she was truly so alone in the world. The day of her discharge finally arrived, and Evelyn hesitated at the door of the apartment the taxi driver had dropped her off at. Taking a deep breath, she slid the key into the lock. The door swung open to reveal a stylish living room, sunlight streaming through tall windows. In the corner sat a gorgeous grand piano, polished to perfection. Evelyn drifted toward it, running her fingers over the sleek black wood and cool ivory keys. She settled onto the bench and experimentally played a scale. The notes swelled into the room like an old friend welcoming her home, and Evelyn suddenly ached to lose herself in a melody. Though she still had no memory of actually learning, her hands seemed to automatically know where to go. Soon she was playing a complex piece she could not name but felt in her bones. The music transported her away from the strange apartment, soothing her turmoil if only for a moment. Over the next week, Evelyn fell into a routine. By day she wandered the city streets, searching for any hint of familiarity in the crowded shops and sidewalk cafes. Each night she lost herself in music, playing until her fingertips throbbed. One drizzly evening, Evelyn lingered at her piano long after she would normally stop. As her weary fingers tripped over the keys, she noticed the candlelight flickering along a tiny gap between the side panel and top. Curious, she grasped the edges and slid the panel aside to reveal a narrow wooden compartment. Inside lay a yellowed sheet of music she did not recognize. Evelyn gently pulled it out, her breath catching as she scanned the notes written lovingly in fountain pen. The ink had faded in places, the paper soft with age. Carefully setting it on the stand, she began to play. The music started slowly, notes drifting whimsically as if carried on a breeze. Then the melody soared, nostalgia and longing woven into every measure. Evelyn's fingers scarcely seemed to touch the keys as the song took on a life of its own, spiraling into a powerful crescendo before gently floating away like a feather on the wind. As the final notes evaporated into the quiet apartment, hot tears splashed down Evelyn's face. The song had enveloped her like a bittersweet embrace from the past, so achingly familiar and yet just out of reach. She knew without doubt that this music held the key to her lost memories. Suddenly, a spark flickered in the darkness behind her eyes. A name burst forth along with a fragmented vision, strong hands gripping a violin, a grin flashing in candlelight. "Michael." Joy and anguish pierced Evelyn as the image rapidly faded, leaving her breathless with more questions than ever. Who was Michael? What was his connection to the haunting song? She had to know. Evelyn carefully tucked the music into her pocket along with her locket. Tomorrow she would start a new journey to unlock the riddles of her past. The forgotten melody had sparked the first embers of hope. Perhaps it could also lead her back home. Armed with only a faded sheet of music and a name fragment, Evelyn left New York the next morning. Every mile took her farther from the life she could not remember and closer to the man who perhaps held the missing pieces. The bus depositioned her in Louisiana as dusk settled over rows of antebellum mansions. Spanish moss dripped from towering oaks, and the heavy air carried notes of honeysuckle and magnolia. The quaint town square felt familiar and foreign all at once. Evelyn's steps slowed before an ornate music hall bearing the etched words Belle Chanson. Inside, a gray-haired woman tidied sheet music scattered across the stage. At Evelyn's approach, she glanced up, eyes crinkling. "Well, I'll be," the woman exclaimed. "Little Evie Monroe, is that you?" Before Evelyn could reply, she was wrapped in a warm, floral-scented embrace. "We thought you were gone forever." Evelyn gently pulled back. "I'm sorry, you know me?" The woman's smile faded. It's Daphne, honey. I taught you to play piano from the time you were knee-high. Don't you remember? Evelyn shook her head apologetically. I was in an accident. I lost my memory. She took a hesitant breath. This might seem strange, but does the name Michael mean anything to you? Daphne clapped a hand to her chest. Lord child, Michael Du Bois was your sweetheart. Such talented musicians, the both of you. Always composing and playing here at Belle Chanson. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She was on the right path after all. As Daphne led her into a seat in the front row, Evelyn pulled the yellowed sheet music from her pocket with a trembling hand. Is this his? Daphne carefully examined the notes. Yes. Yes it is. The boy wrote this for you when you first met. Called it Evelyn's Melody. You two made the most beautiful music together. She looked up, eyes glistening. We all thought you were gone forever after the accident. What accident? Evelyn whispered. Daphne grasped her hand, sorrowfully relaying how a drunk driver had sent Evelyn and Michael's car plunging into a river 3 years prior. Their wrecked vehicle had never been found, and after weeks of fruitless searching, Michael was presumed dead. Evelyn had disappeared that same night with no explanation. We mourned you both for so long, Daphne said, wiping her eyes. She gazed earnestly at Evelyn. Where have you been all this time, child? Evelyn could only shake her head helplessly, fresh anguish welling inside at the missing years of her life. She stayed late into the evening as Daphne shared story after story painting a picture of the passionate, vivacious pianist Evelyn had been. Over the next days, Evelyn met more people from her forgotten past, childhood friends, former teachers, Michael's heartbroken mother. They slowly helped her piece together the fragments, amazed to have her back so unexpectedly. But as questions about her past were finally answered, new ones arose. Why had Michael never searched for her if he had survived? The love described seemed too deep to abandon if even the smallest hope remained. For the first time, doubt regarding Michael crept into Evelyn's mind even as she clung desperately to the belief that reuniting with him would finally unlock everything. Each night she played his melody over and over, willing more memories to resurface. The townspeople encouraged her to perform around the square to revive the music they had so missed, and her playing drew odd crowds. But no matter how beautifully the notes filled the air, weaving past and present together through song, the ultimate answers continued to elude Evelyn. On a humid evening 6 weeks into her stay, Evelyn lingered alone in the darkened music hall, fingers trailing aimlessly across the keys. Perhaps she had been chasing a foolish fantasy. Michael seemed determined to remain lost, and Evelyn felt herself unraveling along with the mystery. As she listlessly reached to collect her sheet music, her gaze caught on an ivory corner peeking from beneath the piano bench. Hands trembling, she pulled out an aged envelope with her name penned in achingly familiar script. Within folded pages, the date heading Michael's letter indicated shortly before her accident. The further she read, the more Evelyn's heart constricted with each apologies and endearment inked in his poetic prose. He asked forgiveness for a fight she could not recall, for lost time they could never reclaim. As candles slowly burned down, she reached the final paragraph. Asterisk, my dearest Evelyn. You are my muse, my light, the music in my soul. If anything should happen to separate us, know I will find you again, in this life or the next. We are two notes destined to form the same melody. Never forget how deeply I cherish you, till my last breath and beyond. Forever yours. Michael Asterisk. Below he had scribbled an address in the Rocky Mountains with the hastily added words, meet me here if all is ever lost. Evelyn slowly lowered the letter as realization crashed over her, she had not been the one lost after all. While she had wandered for answers these 6 weeks, Michael had surely believed her dead all this time. Determination blazed through the tears now slipping down her cheeks. Folding the precious letter, she hurried from the darkened hall out into the sultry night. The midnight bus lumbered down the road mere minutes later as Evelyn clung tightly to the address, picturing Michael's face so clearly now. She was coming, across thousands of miles to bring them both back home. The midnight bus rumbled westward through the darkness as Evelyn clutched Michael's letter, willing the miles to pass faster. She dozed fitfully, dreams filled with fragmented memories of tender embraces, laughter over candlelit dinners, stolen kisses backstage between rehearsals. Each glimpse made her heart constrict more with longing. As dawn broke crimson over the mountains, Evelyn startled awake. There in the distance stood the snow-dusted Rockies, their jagged peaks cutting into the clouds. The day melted into a kaleidoscope of remote highways and thick forests, the bus slowly winding ever higher. Finally, as shadows stretched long over the rugged slopes, it wheezed to a stop at the end of a dusty road. Evelyn stepped out breathing crisp pine-scented air. There she spied a narrow foot trail leading off into the woods marked by a hand-painted sign reading simply Michael's Refuge. Hoisting her bag higher, Evelyn set off down the dusky trail with resolve. The glimpses of mountains between swaying evergreens took her breath away, but she hardly noticed, focused only on the path winding ahead around each bend. Finally through the trees floated the lonely notes of a violin. Evelyn froze, heart suddenly racing. She would know that playing anywhere, the very essence of her soul in melody. Unable to stop the joyful tears, Evelyn flew toward that beckoning music. There nestled in a clearing sat a small log cabin, smoke curling from its stone chimney. And on the porch stood Michael, eyes closed as he coaxed a sorrowful lament from his instrument. Evelyn's bag hit the ground with a thud. Michael's bow screeched across the strings as his eyes flew open. For a suspended moment they simply stared, the gulf of years between them vanishing in an instant. Then Evelyn was running, flinging herself into Michael's stunned arms. As he held her so tight she could scarcely breathe, the force of 3 lost years longing at last broke free. How? Michael finally choked out in wonder, framing her face entreatingly with his hands as if convincing himself she was real. My Evelyn. That night they talked for hours about all they had endured alone, Michael racked with grief and guilt, Evelyn unmoored by her vanished past. Though the pain could never be redeemed, simply being together again was balm for their battered souls. Eventually they fell into exhausted, peaceful sleep still wrapped in each other's arms. In the golden days that followed, Evelyn and Michael slowly revived the magical connection that had first drawn them together. They hiked the mountain trails hand in hand or read side by side before the crackling fireplace late into the night. But though Michael had regained his reason for living, Evelyn's memories remained locked away despite the love surrounding her once more. The same haunting sorrow she first heard in Michael's playing echoed through her own spirit. One crystalline morning, Evelyn wandered down to the lake finding Michael sitting on the end of the dock, gazing pensively at the water. As she settled beside him he sighed heavily. I should be composing symphonies for you, my love. Instead the music inside me shattered the night I lost you. His expression twisted in anguish as he stared down at the weathered violin case in his hands. Now silence mocks all the dreams we once shared. Evelyn cupped his cheek tenderly. Your music led me here, Michael. Now let mine guide you home. Piece by piece they rebuilt what had been broken. Evelyn filled the cabin with piano melodies as Michael hesitantly picked up his violin again. Though awkward and halting at first, soon their playing intertwined fluidly once more as he shook off the rust. The day finally came when Michael gracefully coaxed Evelyn's forgotten melody from the strings. As the notes swelled around them, Evelyn suddenly gasped, hand flying to her mouth. There within her mind's eye flashed scenes from their fateful final night. Racing toward the concert hall, rain pelting the windshield, the blare of horns and screech of tires on slick pavement, then darkness. Evelyn trembled as she slowly lowered her hand, the crash and missing years surging back in a bittersweet flood. She turned shining eyes to Michael even as tears escaped down her cheeks. No words were needed. She was finally home. Michael gently took her hands, joy and sorrow mingling on his own face. Let's make new memories to carry us forward from this day, together again at long last. He nodded toward the aged sheet music still lying on the piano. Play for me, my love. Play our song once more. Evelyn moved to the weathered piano bench, Michael settling close beside her with his violin. As their gazes locked, Evelyn placed her hands tenderly on the keys. Notes swelled to envelop them in a graceful waltz, weaving their separate melodies into one tapestry embroidered by tragedy and time yet emerging even more breathtaking. Soon Michael set aside his bow, pulling Evelyn to her feet. They danced slowly to their intertwined music as golden dusk fell over the cabin. As the final notes gently faded around them, their lips met in a kiss that held the promise of forever. 2 weeks later, with mountains roses and orange aspens flaming outside, Evelyn and Michael made the journey back to Louisiana. A packed audience leapt eagerly to their feet as the couple took the stage, cheers filling Old Belle Chanson once more. Michael bowed elegantly to Evelyn then lifted his violin. As his first resonant notes rang out, Evelyn's hands rippled into the accompaniment. Then her solo soared in joyful reunion upon the air. Back and forth they wove their melodies in seamless communication. Here at long last stood the two soulmates fate had torn apart and destiny reunited. Accelerating now toward the final pages, bride and groom danced fervently toward their long-awaited happy ending. With a graceful flourish Michael brought them home, and the final rich chord hung shimmering in the rafters. Deafening applause erupted, but Evelyn heard none of it. Laughing and crying together, she and Michael bowed again and again before the jubilant standing crowd. Their music was reborn. But even more importantly, so were they. As cheers gradually faded to animated conversations, Evelyn and Michael exited hand in hand. The night breeze carried bright notes and promise as it ruffled the scented roses twining up the hall's columns. Lanterns swung from the oak branches above, illuminating the path leading toward whatever beautiful compositions lay ahead. This melody had guided them through profound heartache to joy again. From this point on, love would forever sing the soundtrack presiding over their lives joined in song.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.